Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this video about the Sun in Gemini. When the Sun is in Gemini, we will bring that light of awareness and personal power and clarity and vision into the realm of life that is intellectual, playful, curious, full of communication and interaction with others. So Gemini is a dual sign. Literally, it's maybe the most dualistic of the signs. And as you notice with the dual signs, they usually have a symbol that is two things. Like there are two fish, there's two people in Gemini. Sagittarius, there's a man and a horse. Virgo is the only one that's not as noticeably dualistic, but you have like a young girl holding a chaff of wheat, or in some instances she's standing up in a boat. There are two things going on. Libra is also quite dualistic with a man and an inanimate object, and also Aquarius with a man and a pot, right? Those are air signs, which also shows you the duality of air. But Gemini is maybe the most dualistic of all to some extent. It's actually a very masculine man, a man holding a club, and a woman playing a musical instrument, a man with a mace and a woman with a lute, as it said back in prehistoric times or, ancient times. The lute was like a guitar or a musical instrument, and the mace is like a club. So it's a very masculine man and a very feminine woman in the same kind of mind. That mentality is meant to illustrate the range of possibility of thought and temperament. Gemini is a very sensitive sign, very sensitively attuned to what people say, how things are stated, the environment. It's an air sign, which is also very attuned not just to language and words, but to the environment, to the atmosphere. It's literally the air flowing. So it's a very subtle sign. It's a sign of Vata, which is also a refined sign. Vata meaning motion and activity, and prana. And it's where prana, or vitality, needs to be sort of called from the motion of Vata. And so, it's one of the most misunderstood signs, I think, in Vedic astrology, because it has a connection to Western astrology. We think, oh, Gemini, they're all playful and fun and la-da-da-da-da, and, two little kids playing. It's a very different kind of energy in Vedic astrology. There's the playfulness, for sure, because of Mercury and the curiosity of children, you might say, who like to play. But it's actually not just playful. Again, it's a very masculine man and a very feminine woman, showing that range of possibility. Okay, and so this means that, what this does is it brings a lot of neutrality, because Gemini will look at things from like every point of view. I used to say, or I sometimes say, it's very much about aesthetic and beauty because of that woman with the musical instrument, but it's the kind of beauty that can only stand up to getting beaten with a club. Now that doesn't mean literally like a piece of art that has to get beaten with a club, but it shows the ability or the scrutiny that something isn't just beautiful on the surface, like some kind of shallow quality. Let's say, for instance, like even something like candy as food, which is tasty, but it doesn't measure under scrutiny, right? If you literally, or I should say metaphorically, beat on it with a hammer, it's not going to hold up. So in this case, like that choice, let's say to eat candy or to just digest very surface, even things like entertainment or music or art, after a while, because Gemini is so relentless in analyzing things and thinking about things and exploring other things, that's the kind of beating on it with a club. That's where that part comes in. So for instance, like you can like popular music let's say on the surface like, oh, that's fun, but then over time, because the Gemini mind will explore all kinds of music, over time that surface enjoyment is sort of like getting beaten with a club by more refined forms. So it's that kind of mentality. So when people have a lot of Gemini in their chart, they'll often be interested in a lot of different art forms and ideas, and it becomes quite refined over time because they're not just satisfied with the little surface thing, even though they'll understand it and they'll be curious about finding it. Over time, because they've gathered so much, this sort of, cream rises to the top. That's when the Gemini energy is powerful. When it's not, they can just get in all kinds of stimulation and not be refined in their perception and in their perceptive awareness. So this is the evolutionary path for Gemini, and when the sun is there, it brings that focus because the sun is the power. And so if someone has that in their natal chart, then that will be where that power emanates from in them. And again, the sun is the Atman, it's the supreme self. So it's that universal self within each person. Okay, the unique self is the Ascendant, because that's the moment you incarnated. Wherever the sun is, though, that's how you find the universal self. That's how you find the Paramatman. And so, let's say if someone has Gemini in their natal chart, they will look for that supreme consciousness and that supreme self in things of Gemini that are related to Gemini and that range of intelligence and thought and idea, like I just said. So they can tend to be even sort of like a heretic on some level because, again, remember, Gemini is kind of anathema to Sagittarius, which is about hope and belief. And again, Gemini will take that hammer and beat on it and say, oh, so you believe in this thing? How well does it measure up to scrutiny? And start beating on it. Maybe Gemini even finds it's beautiful. That Venus part is like, oh yes, that's a very beautiful way to look at things. But what about this? What about this? What about this? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Oh yeah, so that, and they'll explore the history of it. And oh yeah, so Christianity. Okay, well that just happened because the Romans were, it was more political. That's the reason we talk about Christianity. And they might find a way to just dismiss the whole thing because of the intellect. Again, we can get trapped in that as well. And if there's too much beating on it with a hammer and not enough elegance and art and beauty, then it goes too far that way, or it might go too far that way. So again, Gemini in its highest is that neutrality, which is moving between the extremes, the extreme ranges of potential, as typified by the extreme masculine and the extreme feminine. Those are easy archetypes for us to understand. So when the sun is there, the soul is trying to evolve through that concept of understanding the nature of the world. In fact, it's good for astrologers, by the way. In the text it says when the sun is in Gemini, they'll be an astrologer. This is an ancient text. Of course, now everybody doesn't do astrology, but it shows that sort of tendency. It's because in the ancient times when people were educated, there was about 3 or 4 things they were educated at, as far as Brahmins are concerned. And astrology is the one that, if there's a lot of Gemini energy, it can really show this tendency toward astrology, because that's what astrology is. It's about understanding our place in the cosmos. So it's not as religious or devotional, at least at first. So again, when the sun is in Gemini, of course, when it goes through Gemini in the sky each year, the same thing. It's a time for us to really focus on how things work and make adjustments to our current belief system. Again, it's opposite Sagittarius. It's often very useful to look at the opposite of something to more clearly contrast what the thing is itself. So with Gemini, it's the power of using your mind, your rational mind, to understand things rather than just believe blindly. Okay? Because let's say when the sun goes through Gemini, that means the new moon will be in Gemini, and then the full moon will be in Sagittarius, which is where we have to harmonize the rational details of Gemini with the devotional inspiration of Sagittarius. So of course every sign has its opposite folded into it, and every other sign as well. I don't want to get into that too much here, but a lot of my other videos have that concept. So Sun in Gemini, very much about understanding the nature of things, how they work, adjusting your beliefs and your dogmas to fit new information, and the curiosity to explore new information, but the intelligence to not be overwhelmed or to not just mindlessly seek surface stimulation and just keep snacking on candy, but to relentlessly pursue the truth, which is actually shown when you take Gemini and you look at Saturn from that place. What Saturn rules, it rules the 8th and 9th house, which is that relentless pursuit of truth. Relentless is Saturn, truth is the 9th house, and that investigation is the 8th house. So Saturn rules the 8th and 9th house from Gemini, which gives them, especially if Saturn's powerful or when life becomes very serious and difficult, Geminis can become great researchers. So when someone has a lot of planets in Gemini, or let's say the Sun in Gemini, it evokes that soul's wisdom through investigation, research, curiosity, and changing and adjusting through life's ups and downs, like all dual signs. But Gemini does it through the mind, because it's an air sign. There are 4 dual signs. The other dual signs change and transform through their element. Of course, Pisces, water, Virgo, earth, and Sagittarius, fire. But Gemini does it through the mind, through information, and we live in a very Mercury information type of age. So we're all very stimulated, and when the Sun goes through Gemini, or when someone has Gemini in the natal chart, it's very important to not get bogged down in the stimulation, and instead take that power of the Sun to pursue and to push through and to shine the light into the world, and also honor the multiplicity and the variety of life. One of the great things about Mercury, and I would say especially Gemini, because again it's very much about culture and ideas, is this tolerance and this respect for all, not just people, but all beings and all creatures. Gemini is very humanitarian in that regard. Gemini energy tends to love animals as much as people, or gurus and saints as much as, the trees. They have the unique ability to see everything in its proper place, within its range of importance, right? So even though they might acknowledge that a saint is a divine being, and there needs to be reverence, it's no less important to the cosmic unity than the ants. So again, this is also related to Lord Vishnu, who is the deity related to Mercury. We can get into this being a big, long dissertation, but these are things to understand when the Sun goes through Gemini each year. If someone has Gemini in their natal chart, or really any planet in Gemini, but when we're looking at the Sun, we're looking at our vision and our soul, and how we're trying to understand our soul's purpose in this lifetime. Not just our unique identity, but our soul's purpose.